Good morning, everybody. I was going to say if you can take your seats, but there aren't very many seats available. But it's thank you so much for coming. Very welcome to what is the European office here. We're co-located with the Irish Consulate General, as many of you know. So I always thank the Irish Consulate General for their willingness to host us and to support us. I'm really excited. I mean, I don't think we've had a greater attendance than this morning to our now fifth or fourth Brussels to the Bay event. I also want to say welcome to those who are joining online, because it's the first time we do also the live stream online. And we have about 250 people, I think, registered, and then with like more than 100 in the room. It's a full house. And I'm very pleased also because this illustrates what the EU office should be all about. I mean, we opened our doors here about 7 months ago on the 1st of September last year. And our mandate is to bring people together, to bring policymakers together from the EU and the US, to bring stakeholders together, the industry, assembly members, civil society, and I think this is exactly what we are going to do today, and we're going to do more of it. There will be more events of Brussels to the Bay in the months to come. But I think bringing together is really important because we are facing huge challenges. I mean, the EU and the US and the world, and particularly in digital, of course, not only in digital. I mean, how do we make the internet safer? And protect our fundamental values, our fundamental rights. I mean, how do we make sure that internet markets are not dominated, that they are open? How do we make sure that this fantastic new technology of AI brings us all the opportunities and the benefits that the promise it holds, but that it is done in a way that's trustworthy, that it doesn't kind of create major risks to our societies and to our economies? I mean, how do we exploit data in this world? I mean, how do we exploit data but then also protect our privacy? I mean, how do we keep our infrastructures, our services, our institutions safe from cyber attacks? So those are all challenges that we face together as an EU and the US and as the world, and the world is a challenging place, I think. And therefore, the EU and the US really need to work as closely as possible together. And that starts with promoting understanding. And so we're here today to learn more about the EU approach towards AI. We're here to learn more about the US approach towards AI, California approach towards AI. And then from understanding, we can work to cooperation, which we're already doing in the context of the Trade and the Technology Council. And then, of course, we will try to reap as much as possible the mutual benefits through alignment of our approaches. And there's a very strong political expectation and endorsement for the EU and the US to work together on digital issues and on many other issues. So very pleased to welcome you here. Very much looking forward to a quality debate. I mean, we've got quality speakers. I mean, top academics. I mean, we've a member of the California Assembly, representatives of the US government and NIST, colleagues over from Brussels, from DG Connect, who are the lead team on the negotiations on the AI Act and working on the TTC. So very much excited about this. I'm going to hand over the floor now to Brandy, who is going to be our moderator from Berkeley, and please actively participate in this event.
Thank you, Gerard. And also, I'm very excited to see an all-female panel. So instead of a manel, I guess we have a whamel. Yeah, at a tech conference, no less. Yes, exactly. The best people. So I have the Herculean task of actually giving just a very quick, succinct overview of the US federal AI governance strategy and the EU strategy in about 5 minutes. The laughter, yes, we're not going to go deeply into this, but we will in the discussion. Then we'll open it up to discussion. We will have a set of questions here, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. So you can see here a timeline of some of the initiatives going back to 2016. We developed the National AI Research and Development Strategic Plan that has since been updated. It's currently being updated. In 2019, the U.S. signed on to the OECD Responsible AI Principles. Following that, there was an executive order issued under the Trump administration promoting the use of trustworthy AI in the federal government. Then the most influential piece of legislation that has happened in the United States is the National AI Initiative Act of 2020, which was passed and led to a lot of the work at NIST that Elham has been leading, and the development of the National AI Initiative Office within the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Miriam Vogel, if she's in the room or not, she is the chair of the National AI Advisory Committee, which came out of that as well. Also in 2022, there is one thing I want to definitely call out, because I think it's a really piece of legislation that was passed. That's the National AI Training Act, which requires any federal department or agency that's procuring an AI-enabled technology to have those individuals trained in the benefits and risks of AI. And then, of course, in 2023, we had the NIST AI Risk Management Framework release, which is a voluntary framework that developers can use to better identify and mitigate risks. And of course, recently, the AI Bill of Rights was passed. Well, proposed, the framework, yes. The framework was, yes. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jillian. And then I wanted to just touch on some of the state level strategies. So at the state level, there are some pieces of legislation that touch on AI. For the most part, a lot of them are focused on biometric. So in Illinois, we have the Biometric Information Privacy Act, more around privacy and data protection. In California, we have the anti-deepfake law, which actually has now sunsetted in January, and it made it unlawful to distribute a malicious deepfake 90 days before an election. I believe that hasn't been reintroduced. Not that I know. Okay. We do have a bots bill, and then Assembly Member Bauer Khan, has recently introduced, as of yesterday, I believe.
It was heard in committee yesterday.
Heard in committee yesterday, AB 331, which would put in place requirements to do risk assessments and to better ensure that an AI-enabled or an automated decision system that's being used, we have checked it for any bias or discrimination, and appropriate safeguards have been put in place. So I've summarized some of the key themes that are emerging at the state level. We see advisory boards being formed, banning biometrics, focus on workforce development, privacy and data protection, and of course, non-discrimination and auditing. Also, industry has been leading a lot. We have, of course, Microsoft and the Responsible AI Standard, IBM fact sheets, Google's model cards. I can also make these slides available to all of you who are taking pictures, no problem. And then we have Nafrina Singh, who is the lead of Credo AI, which is helping to develop a process for evaluating an AI-enabled system to ensure compliance with relevant laws and regulations. Equal AI, which is headed by Miriam Vogel, she'll be here later today, doing similar work, but more in a nonprofit space. And then I direct the AI Policy Hub with my colleague Jessica Newman at UC Berkeley, where we are training students who will become future leaders in government and industry to think about how do we actually go through this process. And then the EU AI governance landscape, nothing's more daunting than being an American and speaking to a room full of EU citizens about one of their most monumental laws, which hopefully will be passed soon, the Artificial Intelligence Act. We're going to go deep into some of the issues with the EU AI Act and whether or not it's aligned with how the US is approaching AI governance. I think there are two things that really stand out in the AI Act in this risk-based approach, where there's tiered risk levels and then more stringent requirements based off of risk, and then also the implementation of conformity assessments and transparency requirements. And the conformity assessments have definitely some overlap with the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which I know, Elham, you have done some of that work mapping the similarities. And then, of course, GDPR and Article 22 and others. So, of course, the motto of the EU is United in Diversity. And I think all of our approaches for AI governance are quite diverse. So are we actually united in that diversity of how we're approaching AI governance? Where are we diverging? Where are we converging? What are some of the risks or benefits of the convergence or divergence in that space? And so now we will speak on our panel. We're going to have some questions for all of you. If you remember in our prep document, I asked you all to think about what you felt were the most effective AI governance tactics that have been passed in the US and the most ineffective AI governance tactics. The time we have about 2 minutes. Okay, so let's our on has been the most effective or the most ineffective.
I wish we would have started with NIST, but we'll leave most effective for her. I'll go with most ineffective. But just in one sentence, I think the most effective thing that we're doing here in the US is listening to industry and bringing them to the table and trying to have our regulation work with them. I think that, by way of background, I'm a child of Silicon Valley. I grew up in the labs at Xerox PARC. For those of you that are Silicon Valley nerds and know what that means, I played on the first touch screen in my dad's lab. And so I believe deeply in innovation. And I think we do need to be partnering with our innovators to make sure what we're doing keeps our constituents safe and looks out for their interests, but also allows for this technology to do what it's capable of. And I think that what we haven't done is we're not moving as fast as industry is. Right? I mean, AI is coming, it's coming fast. We're already seeing some of what the risks for our community members are. And we are, I think, significantly far behind. And we need to leave it open for innovation, but we also need to be protecting our communities and our democracies, as you heard in the opening remarks. So I think we need to learn fast and act quickly.
Thank you so much. And Elham Tabasi, who's the Associate Director for Emerging Technologies at Information Technology Laboratory at NIST, and NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Elham?
Thank you. So instead of picking, I'm just going to say attributes of good, effective policy to my opinion, the policies that are clear, implementable, and actionable. The requirements are clear. There are tools and standards that help with effective and efficient implementation. And there are metrics and testing methodologies to assuring the correct implementations of that. And then also that those that are a mix of vertical and horizontal, that also goes back to what you said about interdisciplinary approach and an inclusive approach of bringing multiple voices into the process.
Thank you so much, Elham. And Jillian Hadfield, who is the chair and director of the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society at the University of Toronto. Jillian?
Now, did you want me to talk about the US, the EU, effective, ineffective, all of the above?
All of the above.
All
Just
of
in
the above. 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes,
Okay.
and only one, the most effective or the most ineffective.
All right. So
who are you going to put on blast, or who are you going to praise?
all right. So let me just say that effective. I'm really glad to see the EU actually moving forward on regulation. I don't think voluntary self-governance approaches are going to be effective in the long run, although I understand why we're thinking about those. So I think that's important, and a multi-jurisdictional approach using sort of building on a product safety methodologies that have been used over the years very effectively, very well developed. Simultaneously, I think that's the ineffective part of what we're doing, because we have been thinking about AI with the models from the past, and that's addressing things like, okay, what are we going to do about AI in health? What are we going to do about AI in transportation? I think it's appropriate to be thinking about that product safety approach in those settings. But I think with the release of ChatGPT, the whole world has shifted on its axis, and I think from a policy point of view, this is a good thing for us because I think there's much more increased attention to regulation, and also realizing that we've been overly narrowly focused. This is not just another technology that will be rolled out in some places and we'll want to make sure it's safe and doesn't do individual harm. This is transformative technology. It's systemic effects. So what I'm seeing is ineffective right now is I'm not seeing anything that's really responding to the systemic economy-wide impact of the technology.
Yeah, and I'd like to keep you on actually because I'd like us to talk more about governance mechanisms. And you recently published a paper raising concerns about both democratic and a technical deficit in the governance space. Could you talk a little bit more about your work and what you propose we should be doing?
Sure. So the basic approach we're seeing both in, pretty much anywhere you look, the EU, the US, the UK, Canada maybe not. I'm not quite sure. I'm from Canada, and I'm not exactly sure how to categorize it yet. But for the most part, what we're seeing is an approach that demonstrates a technical deficit in the sense that we haven't specified what kinds of training methods should we be using, what kinds of data are we training on, how do we evaluate them, what metrics and should we be evaluating on. We have some metrics around fairness, although we have about 30 of them, so it's a bit of a complicated process. So there's a technical deficit, I think, everywhere. Secondly, across the board, we are seeing frankly, a punting over to industry standard setting processes. Technical industry, thinking that's going to solve our technical thing. Number one, I don't see it solving our technical problem. I see if you look at the standards, they're still pretty general and vague, which is what law looks like, by the way, in most cases. But that brings in a democratic deficit because we cannot have the fundamental trade-offs that are engaged by this technology. How do we trade off privacy and making legal advice more widely available to a big swath of the population? How do you trade off better pandemic response to how we manage data? How do we make those kinds of trade-offs? Those are fundamentally democratic decisions. So what I've been trying to think about is how do you innovate an approach, and I think we need novel approaches that address both that technical and democratic deficit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jillian. And I've been informed that Lucy Scioli is here. She's virtual. We can't see her, but she can hear us, and we should be able to hear her. Lucy's Director for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Industry as part of the EU Commission. Now we can see you, Lucy. Nice to see you. Welcome. We'll just go ahead and get into some of the questions rather than the lightning talk. So based off of what Jillian just said about this deficit in the technical and governance space, how do you think the EU is approaching that?
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone, and apologies for not being able to be there in person, but we had some important work to finalize in Brussels, and I couldn't fly over, but you have some of my colleagues there, so they will also be answering your questions on the European approach. So I will agree with the fact that it is quite complicated to put in place a technical approach and implement all the principles that we would like to have in force in the European Union and elsewhere in terms of respect of fundamental rights and safety. So in the European Union, we of course have an Artificial Intelligence Act, which I think it's probably the most comprehensive approach at the global level. And we are proud of having that because, of course, also in the presentation of the framework itself, we had to do quite a lot of legislative technical work to be able to approach the issues of AI in such a comprehensive way, meaning that we actually apply this framework to basically all the sectors and not to individual only applications. But to a set of applications that we consider risky, whether they're in healthcare or whether they're in employment, we have devised the rules that should be able to apply to all the sectors. Of course, we have, you may be familiar with the requirements that we have introduced in terms of data governance, in terms of documentation of information for the users, of human oversight. But now we need to be able to find ways to facilitate the implementation and the compliance with these requirements by the developers of artificial intelligence. We already started working in the area of standardization, and we hope with standardization to be able to bring some of these requirements into the real world in terms of capabilities for practitioners. I heard just now the comment that, of course, standards are not going to be the answer to everything. And in fact, the use of standards in the European Union will be voluntary. But I think that working also with resources that are increasingly being made available, for example, also by the OECD and by other practitioners, it will be possible to find practical ways to really ensure compliance of artificial intelligence applications with the requirements that we have in the European Union. Of course, always keeping in mind that these requirements only apply to what we consider to be high-risk applications. So we are not regulating all the applications, but only a limited set that, in our opinion, have an important impact on.
Lucy, this is a great segue actually to another question I'd like to pose on the issue of standards. And I want to jump back to you in a minute, but first I want to go to you, Elham. So the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, it's a framework, not a standard, right? But can you talk more about the NIST AI Risk Management Framework? I know it's voluntary. How will it be implemented, and how will it be in alignment with standards that are set?
Yeah, thank you. So as you said, AIRMF is a voluntary framework and directed by a congressional mandate. NIST developed AIRMF, a voluntary framework for managing AI risk in a structured, flexible, measurable way. In terms of the voluntary, again, it's a feature. It shouldn't be a drawback. And NIST is a non-regulatory agency. I should really say that, and it's not our job to develop regulations or policy. But the voluntary nature of that gives some flexibility for organizations of different sizes to be able to adopt it. Flexibility to, as more organizations use it, be able to do iterations on what works, what doesn't work, and improve it. All of those will be conversations that hopefully spur and shape development of the standards. So alignment with the standards has been the first item on the roadmap that we released after the release of the AIRMF. Already had taken some steps on doing crosswalk from AIRMF to the standard that already is out there, and working extensively and strongly with the US industry on participations in development of the international standards. The text of the AIRMF has been developed in an open, transparent, collaborative process. More than 240 organizations commented on this, more than 600 sets of comments from the fields of computer science, mathematics, but also cognitive science, sociologists, philosophers had a look at that. So it's in a way a consensus text to go to the international development, international standard development, and hopefully all those will be a sort of a consensus foundations for policymakers in development of the policies.
And quickly, Elham, if I can follow up on this, it seems that you would probably be the best person to have their finger on the pulse of standards that are being developed. Are you seeing synergies in standards that are being proposed by, say, IEEE and ISO?
Let's just say that a lot, yes and no, and more work can be done on this, and that's something that we will take on doing this.
Okay, thank you. And Assemblymember Bawer Khan, you just introduced AB 331, automated decision tools, which would require a deployer of an automated decision system that's making a consequential decision, so in a high-risk area like healthcare, employment, housing, to conduct impact assessments. Is your bill a response to the void left by the U.S. Congress in this space? And what are the chances, do you think, of the legislation passing?
Well, I have to say I agree with my fellow panelists that there are benefits to voluntary systems. I think the market is going to demand it. I think enterprise users are going to look for people who are complying with these voluntary standards. So I think it will drive some decision making. But as a former regulatory lawyer, I know that my clients were better actors when there were regulations forcing them to be better actors. And then, so, I do think it's really important that we move to providing clear regulation. And I think it's important for innovation. I think industry needs to know where we're going in order to do what they're going to do. Right now, they're guessing. They know it's going to come down the line at some point. And so I think it's really important that we do act in the United States. And yes, Congress, I don't think, is in a position to act on much. And so we as the states are right now filling those voids. And we did it on privacy, right? GDPR was first, and then the California Consumer Privacy Act is the strongest privacy law in the nation and is being implemented in other states because cross-border users just implement it wherever because it's easier than providing different standards. And so we think that moving in California is really important. And I think we're hearing similarities in what California is doing, Europe is doing, on this risk-based approach. Where are we most concerned that our constituents, the Californians, are at risk of being affected by AI in real and meaningful ways? Access to housing, access to employment, access to lending, healthcare decisions, right? And we're already seeing, example after example of those things being negatively impacting people, right? Of, decisions being made in hospitals that are based on prior usage, which here, African Americans have less prior usage, and we saw that as a result they were getting less health care. That's a huge, huge thing that is happening that we cannot, as the government, that we've been asked democratically to make decisions for the people, allowed to continue to happen. And so that's why we're moving. And I think I'm confident that it will pass. We are, right now we have some significant opposition from a broad spectrum of the tech community, and we are working with them. We do want this to be workable, but we also know that, being nervous about regulation is natural, but it's also our job to regulate.
Thank you very much. And Jillian, in your opening remarks, you said that we probably should not rely on voluntary initiatives. So what do you think that, what can we actually do in the United States to move forward on creating a more responsible environment for the development and use of AI?
So I think the concern I have, and I want to go back to, again, just the point that things really, I think from the policy perspective, the conversation shifted in December with the release of ChatGPT. So we have spent the last 6 or 7 years talking a lot about discrimination and impact assessments, and those are important, and we should be addressing those. And I agree totally that industry is still looking for guidance because we say we got to do an impact assessment, harm assessment. Nobody's exactly saying, but what will count? Like, where's the safe harbor for when I've satisfied this? We also have lots of law in place, right? That says you can't discriminate in housing and health and education on these grounds already. So we've got a lot of that structure there. But when I think about the transformative effects here, and I think the key thing, let's go back to the innovation point, we're going to need what I call regulatory technologies that will help us to ensure that big, complex systems that are very hard to get your arms around, very hard to just sort of unpack and see, here's what's going on. We're going to need investment in building technologies that can help us evaluate that. And I'm seeing Credo. But not exactly, right? We are seeing a small startup community building those technologies. And I think we need to figure out as policymakers how to drive investment. And here's, I think, the way you do that. And it's a combination of voluntary and the innovation point. And that is, you have governments approve these technologies, these providers. You basically license them to be licensed providers that satisfy the terms of democratically set legislation. And you say, okay, so you say to a Meta or an Amazon or a Microsoft or Google or a small provider as well, you need to have you need a regulator in certain domains, and you need to find that from a licensed regulator. I think that helps drive demand for those technologies, and that will drive investment in them, because I don't think we're going to be able to address these questions, this regulatory challenge, which I just want to really emphasize it again. It's just transformative. And I think we were already finding that our conventional approaches to regulation were having trouble keeping up with technology, trouble keeping up with globalization over the last few decades. We've just seen a big step jump in that. So we need to be thinking, how are we going to be as creative and as innovative about how we regulate as these technologies are?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jillian. I'd like to actually go to Lucy and ask her a question, because the EU AI Act is entering its final stages. And for certain high-risk applications, they must undergo an impact assessment. So Lucy, could you talk about the implementation of these impact assessments? Are you using any technology to aid in that assessment process?
Well, at the moment, we have not identified the specific technologies that will be used in those processes. But I would like to also highlight another aspect of our regulatory approach, which in my opinion helps also addressing some of the challenges that have just been highlighted, which is the fact, for example, that we have introduced in our regulation the possibility of having regulatory sandboxes for artificial intelligence. So basically creating control frameworks for controlled environments where innovators can go and test their technology in the presence of the authorities. And all this creating a feedback loop to the policymakers, which will gather in what we call an artificial intelligence board. And here we mean basically European Commission and member states representatives. And I think that this loop can also offer ways for learning, new ways of controlling certain aspects of artificial intelligence, so that we don't get surprised, with the big innovations that may take place. And artificial intelligence, if you look historically, it really shows us that sometimes there are like big innovations, and then for a few years you have a period of adaptation, and then you will have again another big innovation. And if you want your regulatory framework to be future proof, you also have to be able to cater for changes and be able to adapt it. And I think that regulatory sandboxes are an important element that will allow us to do that.
Okay, thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, I just want to underline that, because I think this is a really important opportunity to use the regulatory sandbox. And I think Lucy is exactly right to be emphasized, and we all need to recognize we are at the beginning of something that it's extremely difficult to predict where it goes. I don't think, like I give a talk at the Techplomacy in October. I don't think we knew where it was going to be. The conversation was going to be 2 months from now. The technology was going to be. So really critical to be thinking, we can't just write down all the rules and leave it, for a couple of decades and come back to it. It's got to be a learning process. It's got to be experimental. And the only thing I would really want to make sure about the regulatory sandbox is that we are including in the regulatory sandbox the regulatory technology companies that could come in and say, can I show you what I can do? And can I potentially get that license, that checkbox from a government that says, okay, anybody who's using this technology is in compliance. It's a shift from the standards approach. But I think make sure those regulatory sandboxes are welcoming and nurturing that kind of innovation.
Thank you. And on regulatory sandboxes, Assemblymember Bauer Kahn, what do you think about the use of these regulatory sandboxes in the US and also regulatory technologies?
I mean, I think it's impossible for us to set the law and not look back, right? I think part of that is because things change and innovation changes. And so it's actually part of what makes us nervous here in California about the proposition system, because we don't have the ability to change that as easily as we do law. And when we don't act fast enough, the people actually just come and put a proposition on the ballot here, and then we as a legislature can't act and move, and our regulatory agencies can't. And so in this space, I think it's critically important that we're acting as a legislature and creating the ability to change the law as things change. And I think it's true that regulatory sandboxes and that ability to know that you're not the fear of, what can be very significant penalties, can stop innovation, and the ability to provide an opportunity to continue to innovate and look is really critical. So I couldn't agree more. And I think it's part of what, NIST has really been looking at with their framework and their opportunities. And so, this has to be across an intergovernmental partnership, and the state can't do it on our own. And as for the question around technologies, we are at the beginning of figuring out what is happening in other places with these impact assessments. How can compliance be achieved by those using these high-risk technologies? And I think it is something that we need to look at, and how do we do that? How do we make it? Again, I think one of the beauties of privacy laws right now is that we have done a decent job, I wouldn't say a perfect job, of ensuring that companies can comply with GDPR and our privacy laws. And the same thing needs to be true for AI. These are global companies. They have to be able to comply across jurisdictions without too much inconsistency.
Yeah, exactly. We need that convergence. And Elham, the NIST AI risk management framework was released earlier this year, and now entities are starting to implement it. What is NIST doing to capture examples of how people are implementing the NIST AI risk management framework, and are they going to share those with others so that we can start to build this convergence around how to actually implement?
Yeah, that's our hope, and that's what we're encouraging them to do. As we talk with everybody, and there has been, I've been hearing that within government, different government agencies, but also entities have been starting using it. Some of those statements are posted on our website about their using it, but more sort of empirical data. I think what you said about how they're using it, that can form like as AI RMF use cases or examples. We hope that they all contribute that, and we intend to post them on the Trustworthy Responsible AI Resource Center that was launched on March 30th as part of the President's Summit for Democracy that includes AI RMF, the playbook in a more interactive way to help with the utility and use of that. But it also includes a standard tracker, a metrics hub, a glossary, all the different tools that we were fortunate to work with the community on developing them. And we intend to use that as not only a platform for exchange of informations, but also a platform for start up the conversations and some of the efforts. So development of the AI RMF profiles, which are verticals, the tailored set of guidance of the AI RMF for housing, for hiring, for different use cases, will be part of that resource center, including the use cases that you mentioned.
Thank you. And I have to mention one of my favorite documents that was released by NIST is the mitigating bias document, because oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh no, we're mitigating bias. Well, in that report, there's like 34 definitions of bias. So it's like, okay, but what type of bias are you trying to mitigate? It's all more complex.
Yeah. Shout out to my colleague Riva Schwartz that led that effort.
Yeah, it's really good work. And then let me see. So, another point I wanted to make on this. So the profiles. At UC Berkeley, we're leading the development of a profile that will apply the NIST AI risk management framework to generative AI. And generative AI has come up a lot in our discussion today around ChatGPT. So I'd like to jump to Lucy quickly, because I believe as it stands right now, the EU AI Act is not differentiating generative AI systems as more or less risky. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, indeed, we are not differentiating it, but the generative in particular. I mean, what we are trying to make a difference between what we call the foundational models, or what we actually call in our jargon, general purpose artificial intelligence. So these are models that have not one specific purpose, but they may be applied to have very different purposes. And these are differentiated from the high-risk artificial intelligence applications, which are applications whose use may actually generate high risk. So the core of the Artificial Intelligence Act is about artificial intelligence applications that have a specific purpose. But we also consider general purpose artificial intelligence applications, which are more the foundational models like GPT-4, and they may include things like ChatGPT, which are generative model. Now, the problem that we, of course, have is that ChatGPT, for example, has many different applications that could be used for what we consider, for applications that we consider to be high risk. However, at the moment, we are reflecting with the other co-legislators, European Council and the Parliament, on an approach to this kind of technologies, but we have the impression that the requirements that we have for the individual artificial intelligence applications can also apply to this kind of more general AI applications. We will have to make a decision on this before the end of the year when we finalize our work with our co-legislators. But of course, this discussion is high on our policy agenda. Of course, we already have, we already regulate certain aspects that are relevant. For example, ChatGPT is a chatbot. So on the basis of our framework, it has to carry some transparency obligations to make it clear, for example, to the user that the user is interacting with the machine and not with a human. So there are certain aspects that already apply. But in terms of the full set of requirements, we are now analyzing whether the requirements we have for the high-risk applications also apply to the general purpose AI, and we think that it's very similar, and so we will see whether there is need for further adaptations or not. And as I said, we hope to finalize this discussion by the end of the year.
Oh, thank you so much, Lucy. And actually, in the state of California, we have something referred to as the bot bill, which is a law that requires if you're using a bot in any commercial transaction or in any way that might influence your vote in an election, you have to disclose that it's a bot. This might be interesting to think about how the bot bill might relate to GPT. So I have one final question for all of the panelists, the same question. So I'll move down the line and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So my question, I often hear when I am in your position, somebody often says, regulation stifles innovation. And it's a trope we hear all the time, and I'm not sure I believe it. So, but maybe you all do, I don't know. What do you say to that? Does regulation stifle innovation in the AI space?
I mean, we've talked about innovation and the importance of innovation. I think the critical thing is that we have to balance, right, the interests that our society has in safety, security, democracy, equity with innovation, right? Those two things can and should go hand in hand. And if we strike the right balance, it will. And I think that, like I said, you can stifle innovation by being over prescriptive. You can also stifle innovation by not being clear, right? And leaving a lot of open questions that lead those out there innovating, not sure what the future holds. And so I think, what we heard, and I think is correct, is when we indicate where we are going as a government to protect our constituents, to protect the people, and we do so in a way that allows for innovation, which is absolutely possible. I actually think that we see better and more innovation that is in line with our values.
Thank you, Elham.
Yeah, I said NIST is non-regulatory, but as a measurement science agency with standard in our middle name, I slant your questions towards the standard and say that standard actually is good standards that set the rule of the roads and have clear specifications can definitely provide a safe foundations for innovation to flourish.
Jillian.
So I think about this from the point of view that regulation, or what I prefer to say, regulatory infrastructure and legal infrastructure generally, is the platform on which our economies and societies are built. And that platform is not working very well. Regulation, I mean, sometimes we should be stifling innovation because it's not innovation that we want. It's not that that needs to be democratically decided. Which directions do we want to go? What's the impact on society? I think the challenge around regulation is how do we get the most effective kind of regulation, going back to the word you used at the very beginning, the most cost-effective, effective regulation that achieves our democratically set goals of what the trade-offs are. And I think the drain that regulation can have on innovation is when it's ineffective regulation. It's expensive regulation. I worry about the big focus on ex ante processes and documentation and so on. Instead, can we find a more effective, say, an outcome test? Like, I'd rather be testing a system rather than saying, here's all the processes you have to go through to build it. Just show me that it works, right? Then I'll let you sell it. That's an inexpensive, much less expensive, and effective form of regulation that doesn't put this drag on innovation without effect. I'm fine with regulation accomplishing our objectives. What you don't want is regulation that just fills up a lot of paper. And I think this is, the place we found ourselves in at this, say, after a number of decades, is we're trying to keep up with our conventional methods. Lots of paper, lots of text, lots of lawyers, lots of interpretation, lots of uncertainty. That's a drag in a lot of ways. And that's why I come back to regulatory technologies. We need to figure out much more effective ways, cost-effective and effective ways of regulating, so that we're getting the right kind of limitation on innovation and not just the dead weight loss.
Exactly, and this is a topic we're going to be addressing in panel 2, so please stick around for that. Lucy.
Well, I don't think there is a trade-off necessarily between regulation and innovation. And I would also say what we have experienced in the European Union before we even started designing the regulatory framework, we had a survey of enterprises and discovered that 3/4 of them were not using AI because they were afraid of the risk the AI would have on their customers and the difficult legal and unclear situation it would put these enterprises in. So if you have clear rules and if you're able to achieve the balance that was mentioned earlier, then I think it's also stimulating innovation because there will be a higher deployment of the technology. So I do not see a clear trade-off, but I, of course, see the need for balance and for being able to create a future proof frameworks as well.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And we are right at 10 minutes, perfectly timed. So now, questions from the audience. Do we have mics, or do you want me to run around? I'll run around. Sorry. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Shall I start? I hear a lack of concerns for the possibility that these technologies are on an exponential curve. So you're already behind, and maybe they are moving at a pace that is even faster than what you think. And on the technology side, there are many scenarios where we have no idea what could happen. For instance, if you have 1,000 large language models interacting with each other cooperatively or competitively, we have no idea of what comes out of such a scenario. And I could mention many more.
And then please say your name.
Pierre Baldi, University of California, Irvine.
Can I take that? So if you heard a lack of concern about exponential growth, that's just because I didn't say it. Because I did sign the letter.
Okay, I was going to ask that. You need to say what is the letter.
The letter,
The
that's
infamous
right.
letter.
The letter calling for a 6-month pause in, well, it calls for a 6-month pause in training generative models bigger than, it says, GPT-4, although we don't know how big GPT-4 is. And I don't agree with everything in the letter, but the key thing here is I think that it is critical that we actually catch a breath. Because I think the decision, we don't have any of the regulatory infrastructure we actually need. Like, number one, can I make a pitch for national registries? I think every single one of these huge models needs to be registered with governments. We need a lever to be able to pull back if in the future we discover that there are those kinds of risks. It's emergent capabilities, things we don't know. So I signed from that perspective. I don't think the Terminator is on our doorstep. I didn't sign it out of a sense of crisis, but I do think these decisions need to be made, and they need to be made outside of the technology companies. These are not, the pace at which it's coming forward needs to be something that we are participating in as a public.
And then I don't know if you said this, but the letters from the Future of Life Institute, and there's a bit of history there because they wrote the Asilomar AI principles, which I think were pretty much the first set of responsible AI principles
2015.
developed. Yeah, exactly. We have another question.
Hi, I'm Stefano Maffulli from the Open Source Initiative, and I heard mentioned a few times the interaction with the industry and the innovators being somewhat equated to industry and innovators from that front. Are you also consulting and are you making sure that research academia and nonprofits working on developing software that is part of this innovation are also being considered?
No, I can tell it about the AIRMF, that the community that we engaged goes from academia, industry, researchers in both places, advocacy groups, lawyers, state, local, government, international governments.
And I'll say, I don't think there's anyone not at the table in our conversation in California. We may find them, but actually the people we started the work with were academics. And now, are surrounded by NGOs, civil rights organizations, and also, as I said, the innovators who are building the technology. So, we do want, and we're talking to other governments, what are they doing? So our goal is really to be in communication with everyone that has expertise on this, trying to learn the most we can. And as I said, I actually think one when I said what I thought we were doing poorly, it was not moving as fast as innovation. So, but it's hard. You know, I'm a lawyer. I'm not an expert, right? So how do we also get up to speed in order to do this right, in order not to be a drag? And that takes time.
Hi. I'm James. I represent the state of Bavaria, a mega region in the EU, and as everyone knows, the largest state in Germany. And earlier this year, there was a delegation from the EU coming from the parliament, and a part of what they were interested in was AI in many of its forms. So visiting places like NASA and Netflix, but also high efficiency chip processing company that I led them to, as well as other initiatives at the Biodesign Center at Stanford. My interest is twofold. What is the EU taking from the patchwork that is the US, like the different regulations? What are the learnings there in terms of governance? So less in terms of the granular policies, but in the way that the rulemaking is taking place, like how it will look, because you have 27 different EU states, or 28, I've lost count. The second question is also then related to what industry verticals are then seen as most important. I haven't really noticed a discussion on the differentiation between more business-oriented applications versus consumer-oriented applications. Some have focused on, of course, things like ChatGPT and the consumer markets, but then, you know, I focus a lot on business-to-business type business models. So, yeah.
Actually, we're going to have Lucy take the first question. I think she'll appear on the screen soon.
Yes, so it is true that you know, in European Union we have 27 member states, and member states may have very different interests and opinions, but we have discussed with them for almost 2 years to be able to have a text of the regulatory agreement, of the regulatory framework, which was actually agreed with them. So the existing text of the legislation on AI in the European Union has been agreed with 27 member states. And of course, that's very important. And it was also very useful because member states brought even a stronger innovation perspective than we had at the very beginning. And now we will go with the parliament and we will see what else they will bring. But I think that, you know, achieving the possibility of really reflecting all the views of the member states and of different ministries in each member state was certainly a very important achievement. And then for what concerns the applications, what we do in the AI Act is that we make a distinction between artificial intelligence embedded in machines and robots that can be you know, very dangerous from the point of view of physical safety, and those are regulated and will have to show compliance with the requirements of the Act. And then the high-risk artificial intelligence systems that are simply based on software, and for that we have identified a number of areas that we consider to be high risk and of specific applications, in particular in areas like employment, education, and so on. So I think you find all these differences in the Artificial Intelligence Act. For what concerns business to business, of course, take a predictive maintenance artificial intelligence system is likely not to be high risk. And so I think that the level of risk is generally considered a bit lower.
And I'll just add that, so our bill in California applies to all applications that are defined as risky. Some of those are government applications, right? I mean, one of the applications here in California is we use AI to decide how long people are sentenced to terms in prison, right? We consider that a very high risk application, right? So this will apply to governments, to anyone who uses this artificial intelligence, if it's risky, as noted by Lucy, and that could be a business-to-business application. One of the things we're also looking at is what is the role of the developing company and the deploying company in business-to-business relationships, right? Because sometimes those are not the same, right? You may have a deployer who buys it from a developer, and what we want those companies to do might be different.
And I actually have one question online, and then we'll take one more audience question very quickly because we're coming up to time. So Brian Duke asked, how can we call for a 6-month pause on any new releases when we can't control what other countries will be doing? How is that not allowing potential adversaries a 6-month free pass to catch up or speed ahead?
If you really think that a 6-month difference in what's being produced around the world is a greater existential threat than just not having law structure in place, then I think that's a bigger problem. I think we don't know about those, I guess everybody's thinking China, and I don't know anything about China. But I just kind of flip that back to somebody who's taking that position and say, well, you must really think this is extraordinary technology if you think that falling 6 months behind is something we simply cannot tolerate. Simply even to register and know what models we are building. It's completely non-transparent. We don't know what's being built. We don't know, we can't look at it. And for safety reasons, I work with OpenAI and their policy team. You know, they're making careful decisions. They're thinking about safety when they're releasing or not releasing information about what the models look like. But that should be at least disclosed to our governments, I think. I think we need to be tracking it. So wow, you think the world is in way worse shape than I do if you think we couldn't pause for 6 months on this.
Hi, I'm Megan Houston from the British Consulate. Brian's actually usurped much of my question, but I just wanted to ask how realistic you felt the demands in the letter were and what you kind of think the likely effects of the letter will be, because I think most people seem to agree that the 6-month pause is pretty unlikely, but what else might come out of the demands?
I think it's already had the effect I was hoping for, which is that it's opened up a policy conversation that we just have not been having. I mean, the amount of media attention that it's received, the number of requests I've received to talk about it. I think that's part of saying there are some people who are close to this technology who are saying, listen up, folks, it's a big deal. We need to be paying attention and taking action. Do I think we can solve our AI governance problems in 6 months? This is where I disagree with my friend and colleague, Stuart Russell. No, I don't think we can. And I don't think we can say we have to just stop until we've solved it. We're not going to solve it. It's going to be a messy, incremental process. But there are absolutely things we can be doing right now that don't require us to figure out every standard and all the process. There's just basic infrastructure we can put in place. I don't think, do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. Do I think we need to solve the governance problems before we stop the pause? No. Do I think there are risks of falling behind? Yes, some, but the main thing is we need to be having this conversation, and I think it's had the effect. That was my reason for signing.
Thank you. Yeah, and any last final quick comments?
Yeah, and I just want to add that I've been in the legislature for 4 years, and it has changed significantly in those 4 years. I had a colleague who is no longer in the legislature who introduced AI legislation 4 years ago. It didn't make it out of the first committee because we couldn't agree what AI was. And there was such a lack of urgency. And my bill just passed out yesterday with unanimous Democratic support. And so there's just a significant shift in the sense of urgency and need, and that's going to change the conversation.
Very quickly, that I agree that the pace of technology is outpacing the standard policy and all this, but I take it as a call for action for all of the people involved in policy and standards to act much, much faster. And so my take is go faster.
Thank you, and we are at time. Let's thank Lucy also for being here virtually. Thank you all. Now it's coffee break.
Thank you.
Hello, hello. Please take your seats.
I saw that.
The panel 2 starts in 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Please take your seats. Please. Okay, thank you all for finding your seats. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started with our second panel. Our second panel, A Future Way, Opportunities and Barriers to AI Governance in a Globalized World. A lot of the topics that we addressed in panel 1, we'll do a bit of a deeper dive now in panel 2. People in the back, please find your seats. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope everybody feels fully caffeinated and we're ready to go. So in this second panel, we really want to dig into what are the opportunities and barriers of governing AI. One of the questions that was posed at the end of the last panel around, okay, can we actually do a moratorium on AI when other countries likely will not? I think was a very important question about where we are globally in the development and governance of these systems. Same structure as last time. We're going to, each of you will respond in a lightning way, about 2 minutes, as fast as you can. To that opening question, I'll introduce you. So we can just go ahead and go down the line here. So Killian Gross is head of Unit Artificial Intelligence Policy Development and Coordination at the European Commission, DG Connect. And my question for you is, what do you think is the greatest opportunity or the greatest barrier to AI governance in a globalized world?
Thanks a lot for the discussion. I see there's a lot of interest and for the good question. I have to do this in 2 minutes, and if I speak about the AI Act, it normally takes more, so I will try to cut myself short because my team drafted it, and so we love to talk about it. I think the opportunity is, what was for us the biggest opportunity, is that we have here the first of a kind legislation. So we could really grab the ground and we could see what we wanted to do. And if you look at other areas where technology has been regulated, take a very old example like railways, we still have different gauges in different countries, and we still, after 2 centuries, we have not managed to harmonize. On AI, we can, if we do it together with the like-minded partners, we can from the beginning agree on something we want to do together and which should then fit together. I think that the challenge, of course, is a bit the same. If we get the regulatory framework wrong, we will be delayed. And of course, this is a globalized race to a certain extent. So others may overtake us. In the end, we may end up with AI systems coming from third countries. So I think we have there an interest to get it right. But if we manage to find it, I think that was already discussed in the first panel, if we manage to find the right balance, then I think we can combine this a little bit, because we can then as well really create an incentive to take up AI, because this is another thing, so that companies and the public can rely on this. So I stop here because I see I'm out of time.
Giving you the look. Exactly. And Pam Samuelson, Richard M. Sherman, Distinguished Professor of Law and Co-Director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology at Berkeley.
So I think a barrier is arbitrage. And I think we shouldn't take arbitrage lightly, because the more that Europe develops a very complex and very heavily regulated regime for AI, the more that I think some European startups are going to come to the US and basically start here. And if I was advising startups in the AI field, I'd say, develop here. If you get big enough, then maybe you want to go to Europe. But arbitrage, I think, is a really significant barrier to the kind of global governance that I think some people have. Now, that being said, I want to say that I admire a great deal what the Europeans are trying to do here. And I do think that some US policymakers are trying to think about things now in a more focused way because of the regulation. But we don't have a kind of centralized DG Connect that would be able to really do this. And I think another barrier is how do you attract to the government, to the regulatory offices, the kind of people who are talented enough about what AI systems are and how they work so that you can do effective regulation, right? One of the things that's a problem is that if I have a choice about whether or not to start with a company that's doing really cool AI stuff or go to the government, I'm probably going to go to the startup and not to the government. So I think a challenge is trying to sort of figure out how do you recruit people to basically say, look, AI should be done for good, and we have to develop a regulatory structure that will make things happen in a good way. And you want to be part of that, but that's a challenge.
Yeah, I really want to get deeper into that in the discussion, especially, you know, we sit at a university. How do we encourage our students to pursue those career paths? And Miriam Vogel, Chair of the National AI Advisory Committee, President and CEO of Equal AI. What do you think are the greatest barriers or opportunities in the globalized world?
Thank you for the question. And I should specify my answer is on behalf of Equal AI, not on behalf of NIAC, where our work is forthcoming and underway.
And then just make sure NIAC, the National AI Advisory Committee.
Think you can take the girl out of DC, but you can't take
the
acronyms
out of the girl.
So my apologies. Yes, the opportunity and the barrier, I think, interestingly enough, are both the same in this instance, and that is our democratic values. I think that we see the need for urgency, for quick decisions, for quick alignment, for an establishment of guardrails and frameworks to navigate what our AI should look like, what the appropriate safeguards should be. On the other hand, that's time consuming, it's complicated. But that said, as a result, I think we'll get to what will make our AI better, more efficient, more inclusive, more effective. And that is because it will be embedded with our democratic values. And at the end of the day, that will result in what we ultimately need in AI adoption and use, and that's trust. So I think that which we are contending with, tackling with, grappling with, and talking about here today is also what at the end will create the AI that is more useful and appropriate.
Thank you. And Jen Genai, is that right? Jen Genai is the founder and director of Responsible Innovation at Google.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you all for attending. I agree with the first speaker in terms of the opportunities really are about the momentum behind the conversation right now and having a lot of voices participate, that there isn't just one way of identifying risks or identifying the opportunities for better governance and more aligned and cohesive governance, and to ensure that we're moving towards those same democratic goals together. So I'm most excited about the opportunity for that momentum around stakeholder engagement to continue identifying the opportunities for AI also, to either improve health in ways that we've never been able to do it before, and to improve understanding of research sciences and human sciences and life sciences as well. But we need the governance around it. And so making sure that that participation is inclusive and global and participatory is hugely important. For years, Google has been engaging stakeholders, from human rights experts to civil rights experts, conducting user feedback to ensure that we're hearing from more voices to continue to identify those opportunities. The barriers, I feel, could be the all or nothing approach to restrict so much the technology that would prevent these life sciences or environmental improvements, or not having any governance and having a race to the bottom. That we definitely don't want that either, and good governance is required for that.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating this emerging theme on the panel of how do we maximize the societal benefit of these technologies, so how can we actually harness it for good and mitigate the harm. So Navrina Singh, who is the founder and CEO of Credo AI, thinking a lot about governance mechanisms.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm the founder and CEO of a 3-year-old startup, only 1,000th the size of Google. But we are very mighty in bringing AI governance to the market. It's interesting because I do agree with a lot of panelists around the opportunities in AI governance, but I'll provide a slightly different perspective that we are seeing in the private sector, and especially stemming from my experience. I spent the first 2 decades building AI products, and the past 5 years I've been focused on policy, really trying to bridge that oversight deficit that we've seen exist, especially in artificial intelligence. So I'll start with the threats. And I think the biggest threat we have right now is governance is seen as a dirty word. Regulation is seen as a dirty word. And I think we need to reframe that conversation, because governance is actually going to be an enabler for organizations to not only adopt artificial intelligence with confidence, but also be able to leverage the benefit of it for business growth. The second barrier, which again could be turned into an opportunity, is many organizations that we work with, primarily, we work with Global 2000s, we work with SMBs, we work with startups, and also we work with governments in providing our software platform. The second mindset barrier that I'm seeing is going to be challenging is they're seeing governance as a way to get that rubber stamp of approval for compliance. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when that becomes the motivation, rather than ensuring how AI actually can serve the business, how it can serve our economies, as well as how it can serve our societies. And then the last barrier that I see, and a big threat to actually implementing all the good conversations we are having here today, is incentive misalignment. So it's been fascinating for us to see, right now, I'm sure all of you are observing the fast moving world of generative AI, and whether companies are doubling down on responsibility and governance, or are they actually shying away from it? A question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we ensure that the incentives across these different stakeholders who are very rightfully being brought into this conversation, whether it is from the policy, compliance, risk, machine learning, data science side, or regulatory perspective, how do we align their incentives to ensure that we can actually use governance as an enabler rather than a deterrent to innovation? So happy to discuss that more on this panel.
Great, thank you so much, Navrina. And so I'm going to start with a question for you, Killian, and then actually I hope that it will segue nicely to you, Pam. So my question for you, Killian, is do you think that the EU AI Act will have this Brussels effect? And that's the first part. And can mandatory and voluntary AI regulatory systems, such as what we're seeing in the EU and the US, coexist without causing friction or leading to arbitrage?
Thanks a lot. With the Brussels effect, we normally mean, for those who perhaps are not so familiar, that regulation introduced in the EU has an effect, like on the data protection. We have seen that a lot of companies worldwide apply the same standards because they want to be able to promote their products inside the EU as well as in the US or in other markets. So it becomes kind of what we call them the gold plate standard. Will this happen to AI? This is, of course, difficult to say, but I think there are certain chances that there may be a reach out, because we are very clear in the AI Act that we wanted to ensure that every AI system in the EU complies with the rules. So they will, and we have quite a strict regime foreseen for circumvention. We will work with, we have essential requirements for those systems which we consider to be high risk, and we want to underpin them with standards. So we are already working with standardization bodies. And we can see, and here we think we can align a little bit interest from industry and from the side of trustworthiness, because a lot of industry is very used to work with standards. They know this. In a lot of areas, we should not be shy. In a lot of areas like medical products, cars, or alike, industry is used to produce products which are safe. And now we have to learn from this experience and to build it further. Of course, there's some novelty, but it's nothing completely unknown. And what we see there is that we will discuss these standards with international standardization organizations, and these standards will be available. In that respect, to come to your second question, there can be some kind of coexistence. The standards will not be mandatory in Europe, but if you comply with the standard, which will be as voluntary as in the US, you have a presumption that you comply with the requirements. So the compulsory regime in the EU will give a strong incentive to comply, even on a voluntary basis, here with the standards. And that, I think, could trigger indeed the Brussels effect that a lot of companies will think about from the start. Should I not, if I envisage risky uses, should I not then from the start try to comply with the standards in order to be up to the state of the art?
Pam, what's your take on this?
So I think large companies that operate on a global level are going to have reasons to want to comply with the EU standards. I think that's really true. But there's an awful lot of things that are happening in the United States that are kind of low to the ground and will not actually. They don't even know that there is such a thing as an AI Act. Okay, nobody in. I just was at a program recently where the professor was talking about how his graduate students were building large language models and that they were doing this and they were doing this and they were doing this. And you just can't control all the graduate students in the world who are developing this kind of stuff. And there's going to be a lot of innovation will happen on the ground that will completely ignore what's going on in Europe until they get to a certain size. And then they decide that they want to actually make the move. But that just, I know that's not what you want to hear, but it does seem to me that that's more realistic than that everybody's going to do it. And again, I think that the AI Act will have influence on policymakers in the US, but they're more likely to adopt kind of more voluntary standards. I think the NIST risk framework is actually very helpful because even if you're a smallish company, you can actually go through and you see the checklist of things that you need to pay attention to. And that's actually useful. And it's also more flexible because it doesn't have this sort of like high barrier that I think the EU Act does.
Thank you, Pam. And I'm going to actually jump to Jen to give the perspective from Google, which is one of those companies that has a very, very large foothold in the EU. Will the Brussels effect cause Google to implement some of these responsible AI strategies in all of their markets?
So Google does take a global approach to much of its efforts, apart from obviously where there's regional legal requirements. So specific to the global governance of AI and a regulatory approach, we've been engaging for years with many different stakeholders across academia and regulatory bodies and non-governmental groups, and addressing one of Pam's concerns of working with academic institutions to make sure that we are sharing our ethics and responsible AI learnings to make them modules across different academic institutions, because we also agree that it shouldn't happen later and people shouldn't be surprised by regulation. It should be a cultural change and cultural shift that people think about these considerations from the start. So we're strong proponents. We've been doing that for years. And I think I said large academic institutions. They're not the only ones we work with. Obviously, we're very conscious of inclusion and diversity, and we've actively worked specifically with historically Black universities as well to ensure that we're sharing a lot of these ethics and responsible governance learnings across the board. For those global considerations, as I say, engaging with stakeholders across global standards body like ISO and IEEE, we try and just share our expertise, but also to learn from the many different voices in those rooms. They've been very helpful to me as I've built this team across the past 5 years, and I've worked on trust and safety of users for 16 years, that keeping users safe, maximizing benefits and minimizing harms, what I do every day for 16 years, and I try and share that knowledge, but stay open to those voices, because we've also heard from our users, from other stakeholders, about the not just identification of risk, but the fear of risk and how that can change over time. And so we take that into account as we prioritize and take a risk-based approach, which NIST has been an excellent model as well, as we've both informed that and used it ourselves, that we do find that there's opportunities to refine our risk assessment frameworks even within the company. So taking that global approach, looking at regulation that's been drafted across the world to inform our approach, as well as sharing, here's tools that can help us achieve those regulations as well. But it's not just tools-based, it's also the norms, the governance, the practices, the trainings, the processes. And I think NIST does a pretty good job of identifying that. But the EU in the draft of the AI Act also identifies some of these other considerations around accountability, transparency, that are also not just tools-based, but they're also within the UI of the product. So we try and ensure that we're testing some of those opportunities as well, and showing how this regulation can be aligned in many ways, especially in the fairness and transparency space.
Thank you so much, Jen. And then just also to reemphasize the point, it's not just large companies like Google that are creating these models, but also academics, those pesky grad students in their small closet-like offices. And also, the elephant in the room is that government entities are also increasingly developing AI-enabled decision-making tools. So AB is at 334. Memory would also apply to the public sector. So there is this multi-stakeholder, necessity here that it's not just the big players building these technologies. Miriam, you co-chair the National AI Advisory Committee. I know that you mentioned your remarks today are based off of Equal AI, but I would like to know a little bit more about the NIAC and its multi-stakeholder approach, because I know that your co-chair is James Manika from Google, right? Navrina Singh sits also on NIAC.
Absolutely. Happy to share information about it. So we have been in existence for almost a year. We were launched by the Secretary of Commerce May 1st of last year. And there are 26 members. We had 27. We lost one to the administration. We represent a wide cross-section of AI expertise. So we have civil society, academia, industry, large and small, represented on our committee. And our tasking is to advise the president and the AI Initiative Office at the White House on AI policy. So in some ways, it's a very broad mandate. For our first year, we've read a more narrow statutory interpretation, and perhaps that's my background as a policy and lawyer, that I wanted to stick to the question asked of us. And so there were 5 particular areas that were highlighted in the statute. And what we've done as a group of 26 is divided ourselves into 5 working groups. Everybody is on 2, all members, other than the vice chair and myself, are on 2 working groups, and had work really proactively in the working group structure for year 1. So those are Trustworthy AI was our first working group. It was mentioned prominently in the statute. It also was something that in our first public meeting, we aligned to a member that our definition of AI going forward, the AI that we are working for and supporting with policy recommendations, was trustworthy, inclusive, effective AI. So we wanted Trustworthy AI to be, for its first year, a separate working group to allow a fulsome conversation, but it really is woven through all of our conversations and efforts. Our second working group focuses on international and national research and development. And that's the only one that has 2 chairs of that working group. And that's because it reflects the reality where we have an industry chair, and we have a chair who currently sits in industry, previously from academia, and a co-chair who sits in academia, because that is the reality of the research landscape. We have our third working group focused on workforce, something that we hope and plan to delve even further in year 2. I should note it's a 3-year appointment. Our fourth working group focuses on, it's called competitiveness, but really what it does is there's about 6 places in the statute where it talks about the National AI Initiative Office and efforts in the White House and the executive branch. And so that working group thinks about coordination, alignment, leadership in the executive branch to ensure AI coordination and leadership. And the 5th working group is international collaboration. So I'm taking notes on all that's being discussed here today, and in our year 2, I imagine we'll go much deeper on that. We will have our 3rd public meeting. I'm sorry, my brain's a little slow today. 4th public meeting, thank you, coming up in DC in 2 weeks. We'll convene as a committee. We'll share our findings from year 1, and we will launch into year 2, where we are really poised to, I hope, have respond to the calling that we've been asked, given that year 1 is usually a year to compile yourselves, organize, learn the processes. And for us, it was also a matter of understanding what's currently happening in the US government, since that's who we were supposed to be advising. It takes time to make sure we are understanding what is actually happening and needs to.
Yeah, I can't underestimate the difficulty of that task, because a lot of different agencies are doing a lot of different things. So thank you so much, Miriam. And Navrina, you also sit on NIAC, and you're leading really impactful work on governance, assurance, and auditing of AI systems. Can you talk a little bit about that work and how it relates to what's happening domestically and internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, disclaimer, I'm not representing NIAC here. I'm representing Credo AI, startup I started about 3 years ago after spending multiple years in the private sector. So as you can imagine, the intentions and the work and the collaboration has happened in the responsible AI space, especially for the past 6 to 7 years. But as I mentioned, there was no intentional action. And how do you actually make it easy, not only for the big corporations, but a SMB, a startup, to take in, let's say, the NIST AI RMF or to take in EU AI Act and operationalize it? And as you can imagine, that's a huge task. So what we have done at Credo AI is we've built a software platform that basically takes in whether it is emerging standards, existing standards like NIST AI RMF or guidance, or it is emerging regulations like EU AI Act, or if it is existing regulations like New York City Law number 144, or if it is company policies, because as you can imagine, a lot of organizations, including Google, have done a phenomenal job in coming up with their own internal policies. But how do you actually operationalize and codify it so that, one, you can bring oversight and accountability throughout the entire AI life cycle? And secondly, something which Ilham said was really critical. It goes beyond processes. It is about how do you measure, to make sure that you are keeping accountable to the metrics that are being posed in these regulations. So at Credo, what we've been really focused on is operationalizing all these standards and regulations and company policies and providing a mechanism for organizations to get on this governance journey in an easy way. Because as you can imagine, this is challenging and it should not happen like final minute because you want to prevent some regulatory fine. So we've been really focused on how do you bring governance front and center to get business outcomes, whether it is to land more customers, whether it is to build trust with your customers, whether it is to add to bottom line, top line, green line growth, or whether it is to manage generative AI and new risks, everything from copyright infringement to factuality. These are big, complex topics. So I know we are a small startup, but we've operationalized all this so that every organization, irrespective of the size, can start on this governance journeys and meet the societal as well as the economical impacts that we are hoping AI brings.
Thank you so much. And I have a quick question for you, Killian, and then I have a joint question for Pam and Jen. So my first question for you is the use of these regulatory technologies and third parties. Are you seeing a similar thing in the EU where there's this development of third parties that will assist in the auditing?
Well, for us, of course, the key thing is that we achieve the regulatory objectives, that we make AI trustworthy, and that we don't create too much burden, and because we don't want to stifle innovation. So we need to find this balance. So every technology, of course, which helps us to achieve this objective is most welcome. And this is clear. And we have examples in the regulation where we already try to rely on this. For instance, when on documentation, we will want to work with logs, so we don't want to create huge paperwork. We think it's ideal if we have logs in the system so that it's basically automatically generated and it doesn't do any concern. It is not any burden for the user to log, to keep any kind of documents of what has happened. Same for human oversight. The more we can build in the system, the system as such by design is safe and trustworthy, the easier it gets. On the side of on the oversight aspect, we will have a certain mix, because what we see in our system is that we will have notified bodies, which are normally private companies who are certified to do testing. So there will be a market. So this creates a market, and we spoke to a lot of these companies because this market of technical certification in view of, for instance, liability risks or safety risk is an increasing market. We see this a lot. There are strong organizations doing that, and they have a lot of interest. And we see when we speak to them, then of course they try as well to develop methods to do this in a rather straightforward way. There's a second side of it, of course, which I think is unavoidable. It's that you need as well governmental agencies who are able to check what has happened. Because if something goes wrong, and this is in our system the ex post part, then there must be governmental oversight, and therefore governments must as well be equipped to a certain extent, to a level which allows them to, on equal footing, to look at these systems. And here we can provide some support. We think about a pool of experts. We think about union testing facilities, so really to help particular smaller administrations to do this task. But I think that this, in the end, to cut a long story short, there will be a mix. It would be good to have tools. The more tools can help, for instance, to keep the data clean from the beginning or to check on certain biases, the better. There can be private actors in the conformity assessment, but I think as this is a regulation, there must as well be a certain role of public authorities at the end.
Okay, thank you. So as I understand it, they can evaluate it. These third parties can do this evaluation, but government should still be involved.
Yeah, first, the bodies need to be certified by the government. So there will be authorities checking whether the bodies have the capabilities of doing this. And once they're certified, then they can themselves check the systems. That's the ex ante part. And of course, there's an ex post part. So if something goes wrong or there are complaints, there must be a public authority able to check this again.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I have a joint question for Jen and Pam. We've seen this rush of the companies releasing these large models. We have Bard, we have ChatGPT-4, but then also a call for a moratorium on these applications. So are we ringing the alarm bell too early? And even in the EU, we have the Ireland Data Protection Authority enforcing a closure, right? No, Italian. Sorry, Italian. The
Italian Data Protection Authority.
Yes, the Italian Data Protection Authority on GPT-4. So, but this pressure of the companies, and it was quite clear that once one released, all of the others just felt they must release it. What is the risk of that? And then what is the role of governance in overseeing these early releases?
Yeah, so our CEO has been clear that we need to be bold and responsible with these new technologies. So these innovations do have the opportunity to create a lot of economic impact, a lot of the social benefits I mentioned earlier from life sciences and health and things that we've never been able to address from a sustainability or energy perspective before. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but at the same time, in the same sentence, he always says about being responsible. And those responsibilities haven't significantly changed with the move to generative AI. And Google has been working on AI for many years, machine learning and AI research for decades at this stage. So for us, this is more about building momentum around that existing work. That we'd released our paper around Lambda a year or 2 years ago. And with that paper, we had identified the risks and why we were holding back some of that research and some of the product advancement at that stage from the public, because a lot of the work continued internally, whether with my team, a bunch of ethicists and specialists in the area of responsible innovation, as well as our trust and safety partners who are actively building enforcement models, a lot of the engineering to identify these risks and be able to address them at scale. So for us, the work has been definitely advancing for a number of years, but yeah, there's a lot of momentum. And to our earlier point, I think some of that momentum has led to a lot of these conversations around risks and ensuring that we understand them. And we definitely agree people should be talking about the risks and concerns and how to solve them. I get a little bit concerned, given my job, if people only talk about risks and not the solutions and the potential ability to solve it. And I would argue a better call to action than a moratorium may be, what are we all going to do to address these issues? How do we work together, to Killian's point, to identify where our priorities should lie, where do the greatest risks lie, and then for other things to allow that innovation to continue. But we have to be clear of the differences between a sky is falling approach and these are risks that definitely need to be addressed. And we've been clear about that. We've been working on machine learning fairness. I started working on it back in like 2014. So this is years-long efforts to try and identify these risks and how to address them. To Killian's point, it's not just tools. We have opened up these tools to small and medium business as well, like fairness indicators, but it's still a work in progress. We are seeing from a generative AI approach that many of our existing governance structures and tools are helpful in this regard, and then we have a gap between it. So we're spending a lot of time to identify where are those gaps and how do we close them. We don't close them alone. That is also why we're participating in conversations like this. Where are the concerns? How are other people addressing these concerns? We don't try and pretend we have all the answers, but we have spent a lot of time thinking through these risks, and we want to do a better job to address them.
All right, thank you so much, Jen. And again, the letter has come up, and that we perhaps shouldn't stop, but actually put more effort into building those governance mechanisms. So Pam, what's the role of governance mechanisms and the rule of law in this space?
So I think that I agree with the speakers from the first panel that the 6-month the call for a six-month moratorium is a wake-up call for some policy discussions that need to take place, and that should have maybe been taking place before, but I think NIST, for example, just published another request for comments about AI issues, and the deadline is June 10th for those of you who are interested in commenting, and they identify several questions that they would like to have people comment on. So I think there has been some momentum. I don't think it had any effect at all about slowing down development. I'm sorry. But it may have made people a little more cautious about the next release. So maybe they take 2 months more to test it before they release it. But in terms of sort of the overall moratorium, it was wishful thinking.
Just quickly, one of the signatories on that letter, who is a billionaire who bought a platform that tweets, like maybe he could put a little bit of the money where his mouth is and like invest in some of these efforts. Hopefully he hears that. He will actually do something.
That's not like
no, I know. I know, but one can hope.
Not with that guy.
No. Nafrina, you look like you wanted to say something.
going to clarify, it's not NIST, it's NTIA.
Oh, NTIA, sorry. Yeah, right.
I think important to understand the distinction.
Sorry. Yeah, I meant to say that.
Exactly. And then Miriam, let's go back to you. And actually, I'd like to hear more about what you're doing at Equal AI, because you wear two hats, right? Working with NIAC and also Equal AI.
Thank you for the question. So this is what we grapple with day in, day out. So Equal AI was founded over 4 years ago to address bias and other risks in AI. And at that time, it was a novel concept. In our first year, it was a headline that came up a little bit. It was a curiosity. And so we've frankly been so grateful for the EU AI Act developments and the NIST frameworks, because we focus on working with companies to get them to understand that this is something they need to care about, that they can't wait for the regulations to come in place because it's too late at that point. And we liken it to cyber. You know, people did not think cybersecurity was their problem. If you don't understand that responsible AI governance is your problem, talk to your HR companies to understand where you are using AI, because you are. And it is a pivotal function, and you are keeping yourself from your best talent or your best decisions if you're not including a framework for governance in the way that you're using your AI in your game plan. And so we work with companies that still, I would say, went from 90% of our work to 50% of our work is helping people understand that responsible AI governance is something they need to be thinking about. And so we'll talk to board organizations and institutional shareholders, individuals, et cetera, to try and get them to buy into that concept. And then we have a bunch of different ways that we help them understand, what does responsible AI governance mean? Okay, you got me. So now what do I do? So we work with some leaders in industry to help identify what are best practices. So we learn from Google and Microsoft and Salesforce, DeepMind. We work with Credo offline. We work with everyone who cares about responsible AI governance. We want to convene. We want the more input, the better, on what is a best practice, so that those executives who are day in, day out doing this work have clarity. I can't wait 5 years. I need to know today what is a best practice and how do I start implementing it, so when the regulations are in effect, I can be in compliance and hopefully even in a better position than that.
My follow-up question to this is, are you seeing any divergence in governance practices where you cannot simultaneously be compliant with two laws?
To me,
or like all of you.
I mean, I think the great example is one of the, so I think first of all, there's not a lot of certainty on how much law there is on the books currently that is AI applicable. I think there's discussion, there's starting to be some awareness that there is laws you are probably in violation of, but there's not a lot of clarity on what that is. So for instance, we had a historic decision come out, or paper come out from DOJ and the EEOC, the Equal.
And DOJ is?
Thank you.
Department of Justice.
Going on the second one, but yes, you're right. You're right. Department of Justice. Thank you. And the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who both are enforcers of civil rights laws in the U.S., who have not spoken jointly ever historically, who came out last May, and said, if you're using AI in your HR systems, which you probably are, you have to be careful of all the civil rights laws under our purview, including specifically the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. So how does that play out? Well, if you're using AI in facial recognition, we are familiar with some of the biases and harms and ways that you will have disparity. Well, if you're talking about voice recognition, facial recognition is in an even better place than voice recognition in terms of ensuring equal access and ensuring that people are heard. Voice recognition has been demonstrated to be less apt at hearing higher tones, female voices than male voices for similar reasons, but as a result, are you going to be heard? And then it becomes even more of a problem when you're talking about legal compliance with the ADA, because is it going to understand speech impediments? So if you're using voice recognition to be able to access your systems, are you in ADA violation, let alone all the other laws where there are questions that remain? So in answer to your question, is there clarity on laws that are currently on the books? We haven't gotten to the point yet where I've seen people really struggle with the duality of the different jurisdictions, because they are still at the tip of the iceberg, understanding how lack of compliance they are at the top level.
And then I have a follow-up to that for Pam and Navrina. So Pam, we have laws already that can be used in this space. So do we need a new law, a new federal law specifically focused on AI, or do we need more clarity on how our existing laws apply to the use of AI-enabled tools and systems?
Well, I can't not mention copyright because copyright is one of the tools that's out there, and there are several lawsuits now pending in federal court arguing that the training data ingestion in copyright materials are an infringement of copyright. And I think the copyright industries are going to move for more legislation to stop training data without permission. So the Authors Guild and several other groups were doing that, and of course the argument also is that the outputs are all infringing derivative works. Now, I don't happen to find that either argument persuasive, but the federal courts will actually do something about it. But that law is not getting ignored, and I think is stirring up a lot of concern, because that could stop things really in their tracks if the cases come out the way that the plaintiffs want them to. But I think one of the things that these advisory committees can, I think, do is sort of say, hey, there are these product liability rules. They've been on the books for a long time, and I don't see any reason why product liability laws won't kick in. A lot of laws, again, regulating privacy in California and cybersecurity issues. So I think we may need some sector-specific rules about AI at some point, but I think it's premature at the moment to have any legislation that would either generally or even in a specific sector. So developing these best practices, working toward regulation that would actually be nimble enough to last more than 6 months. I think the problem, if you put something in place and it's a regulation that applies across the board, and then something completely like you did never think of was going to happen, that actually makes the law brittle rather than flexible. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, for anyone who's in a policy environment. Now, I realize that the Europeans decided they're going to go for it anyway, but I think even ChatGPT actually kind of like, oh, what do we do about that? So it is actually such a fast-moving time in terms of technology. For law to catch up is really difficult.
And about best practices, Navrina, this is targeted to you, but others also talk about it on your platform. I'm assuming you're starting to see some best practices in the implementation. Can you talk more about that? Or are you seeing any divergence of best practices across industry and other stakeholders?
So first, there is lots of divergence. So I do want to be specific about that. But I am heartened to see standards emerge globally that companies are starting to pay attention to. Having said that, I would like to separate out this conversation in two core categories, because I think what we are seeing right now does not apply to foundation models, large language model, dual purpose models. So what I'll be sharing is primarily focused on narrow AI, which has been, I would say, the industry's norm for the longest time. So, if you think about sectors that we work in, financial services, insurance, government, HR tech, we are seeing a lot of use of narrow AI, which is focused on structured data sets. Now, even in those scenarios, you can imagine there's not an alignment on what does good look like when it comes to regulations that already exist and also emerging regulations. So I'm a big proponent for contextual governance, because I think based on the use cases, the guardrails that need to be put in place have to be specified. And I do agree with Pam. I don't think we can wait for regulations, which is going to take some time, and we should be thoughtful about what those regulations entail. But I think there's a mechanism to start introducing accountability. Now, whether that accountability happens through disclosure reporting, transparency reporting, or at the time of procurement, a big discussion we've been having is, if you think about government procurement within the United States, and then they're procuring commercial AI at large scale. So what can we do at that stage to bring accountability, just as an example? Now, shifting gears to this dual purpose AI, the large language models and foundation models, the world that we are living in, absolutely there's no clarity. So we are getting pinged day in, day out by organizations where suddenly there is this wake-up call from the CEO that my employees are using any form of, whether it's GPT-4 or Bard, and they're like, what do I do? My risk exposure suddenly changed overnight. I don't understand, how do I prevent IP leakage? I don't understand, what should I be doing about copyright? I don't understand, how should I be thinking about factuality? So in this new realm, Brandy, we don't have clarity. We have a lot of divergence, and I would say it's a complex space that the companies are trying to tackle.
And so I want to talk a little bit about these regulatory technologies, because this is such an uncertain time of how to actually evaluate these tools and do a risk assessment. If you were here for the last panel, I mentioned a NIST report on managing bias, where there's over 30 definitions of bias in that report, which oftentimes you cannot, address two biases at the same time, that they would maybe be in conflict with each other. So these assessments, like conformity assessments or risk assessments or impact assessments, how do we mitigate the harm of there being this potentially false sense of due diligence to the consumer when they see it and it just says, look, we did a risk assessment, no need to worry here, it's all good? And the regulators, when they look at those, what should they do? How do you trust that the assessment has been done appropriately? And also the benefits and risks of doing that, because there's always a balance, right?
Well, this is a challenge indeed. The AI Act, as we had proposed it, is based on the intended purpose. So we want to see whether the system pursues this purpose and does this in a non-biased way. Of course, now if a system has multiple purposes, this is much more complex. This is clear, and there is a lot of thought now going on what should happen. If we start to look at from the result which we want to achieve, I think it must be clear that even if we have a general purpose AI system, the standard which we have to achieve in a risky situation cannot be different just because there are multiple purposes. It would be kind of absurd if you say, if you have just an AI for built up for HR or for recruitment, you have you have to fulfill certain standards, you have to be certified. But if you use a general purpose AI and you do pretty much the same, you ask basically to write reports about your employees or to job advertisements, and you don't need to do it because it's general purpose and you can't really check it. So I think we have there an obligation of results. We need to make sure that this happens. And now what we have is a discussion in Brussels how to best achieve this, whether we need some kind of more general assessment of the general purpose AI, taking into account the specificities. Our Council of Ministers or our member states have suggested that we should then a little bit specify our requirements, exactly, for instance, for this purpose of looking at bias. How shall we deal with bias if we do not have yet one specific purpose? So they tasked the Commission to give an implementing act to specify this further in delegated legislation because this is technically very complex. That's one way we want to be future-proof, that we allow us these kind of delegations to the administration to prepare implementing acts. This is certainly one way of doing this. And then, of course, there's a second point is when these models, because these foundational models are then afterwards used for specific purposes, then to make sure that these specific purposes, then there is another ante conformity assessment or certification scheme, because then very often the provider doing that next step in the development will have to rely on the data which in the first place has been used. So there will be a need to cooperate between in order to make this meaningful and to understand, because you may even run the risk that the one developing this, setting up on the system, doesn't even fully understand or oversee the basic system, and therefore is, even if it's good willing or she, not really able to do this. So these are a bit the things we are thinking of, but I don't think that the newcomer on the block puts into question the whole architecture of the act. I think it still works, but we need certainly to reflect how to adapt it in a meaningful way to make it practical.
I have a quick follow-up question to that. Who is liable? And are you differentiating the developer of a general purpose AI system or a generative AI system from downstream developers who are using that in a specific context?
Well, liable for us is a different term. It's a term of damage. If there's a damage, and then of course there are different people can be liable. That can be the producer of the system.
Who has to do the assessment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you speak about who's responsible, that is what we do in the AI Act, because we don't really deal with liability. For us, responsible is the provider, so the one really releasing the system to the market. Now, if the system is already on the market, but it's what we call substantively changed, and that means either you add a purpose which was not checked in the first certification, or you develop it further so that there are new risks which go beyond what has been checked, then the one changing it becomes a provider and has to do the certification. So it's normally it's a provider, but if you're a user and you redevelop the system, you change it further, then you can become the provider yourself.
That's a rabbit hole of like chaos. So let's take OpenAI as an example. They would be the one that would have to do the assessment.
Yes, OpenAI would have to do the assessment. If now another developer, I mean, I speak here about open source systems. If another developer would take such a system and would develop out of this system something else, he of course would become a provider. I think that's I wouldn't see this as excessively complicated. It's basically, but it's clear, OpenAI has released that system, so for OpenAI, they would be responsible.
Okay, and Jen, how is Google approaching the implementation of these assessments?
So for us, we do a lot of the assessments internally. That's part of our team's jobs that we, when we originally created our AI principles about 5 years ago, took about a year's worth of work of research where we looked at existing standards from either global standards bodies, regulation that was currently being drafted, whether it was mostly non-governmental agencies who had their standards at the time, and then released our principles to ensure that we had not just a principled approach, but a transparent approach as well. Like, we deliberately didn't just release them internally. We want to ensure that essentially everyone externally could hold us accountable to those same principles as well. So for the governance of that, when we built it 5 years ago, and as we've continued to iterate on it, as I mentioned earlier, even conversations like this and our engagements with NIST and different bodies inform and refine how we build and adopt our governance structures, new technologies. And again, I like Killian's point that it's about adapting them. I would be concerned if people feel they have to restart governance and restart rules and regulations and processes, because there's so much already done. So for us, the governance processes were adapted, built on that AIR principles approach. Our risk assessment frameworks change at least annually to take into account either changes, what's happening externally, or what we've learned within our products. Because we are a central team that supports every product, we're able to learn how the different AI models or different approaches are adopted in different products to learn commonalities, best practices, different definitions of fairness. We are very familiar of how the different definitions of fairness do not always meet together. And back to an original question I think you had with Miriam of not violations of different regulations, but certainly tensions between things like privacy and fairness. Privacy is one of our principles, fairness is one of our principles, accountability and transparency is another principle. for a lot of our fairness work, we were hitting these tensions of privacy that in order to ensure that our systems were fair to everybody, we needed some information to understand who those users were. We weren't able to get that information, so we had to establish whole new mechanisms to request user feedback with informed consent in order to answer some of those questions. So for small and medium businesses, they may have extra difficulty doing that because they don't have the same either user feedback channels or tools that we may be able to have. So we see that tension between some of our principles. Transparency, again, coming from the trust and safety world, a lot of our transparency efforts, we have to be very careful because of malicious actors and the risk of fraud and abuse to our users. Transparency doesn't help in many cases to our users. It's used by fraudsters to violate our system. So bringing that into the generative AI space and trying to understand how to be transparent and accountable in an appropriate way that still protects our users, another tension that we have to go through as we think of those governance structures. And then again, governance structures isn't just the due diligence approach. We don't just rest on my team conducting our ethics reviews, engaging teams across the companies. We also look at then the outcome metrics. We hold teams accountable to monitoring their AI models from a fairness perspective, from a privacy, from a safety perspective. And so it's due diligence and metrics and accountability kind of tied together as well. And then finally, we obviously provide a lot of feedback channels once we release our products, that we want to ensure that once it's out in the wild, essentially that we're also continuing to learn and fine tune those models as well. So kind of internal governance, our processes, the principled approach, but also that education and training I mentioned in one of my first answers isn't just for external people. We also ensure that our employees go through our ethics training, our AI principles issue spotting training. It's not up to my team only as a central team to identify these issues. What we try and say is it's a collective responsibility, and that's why we train tens of thousands of employees to issue spot these themselves.
Great, thank you so much. You brought up transparency and this tension that it could actually be used by nefarious actors. And I know in the EU AI Act, there are some transparency requirements on certain moderate to high risk AI systems. Are you thinking about this? That the more transparency, how it might cause some harm to certain stakeholder groups?
Well, we have transparency in two places in the Act. We have transparency for the category which Lucy described as the high risk, so where we think you need an ex-ante certification, and there you need to ensure a certain transparency, in particular that the user understands the limits of the system. So you have to explain to the one using it what the system can do and what the limits are. This is one kind of transparency, as we call it in our jargon, if you wish.
And
then
quickly,
we have the
that's
special,
still high level transparency, though. Just
this is to explain. This is really to make sure that the user understands. The other thing is, what do you do with the affected person? What do you do with the party, the citizen, just communicating with the system, not knowing that he or she is communicating with the system? And there we have a transparency obligation for what you call this lower level of risk. So that, for instance, and that would be important for ChatGPT, that you are informed that you communicate with a chat, or that you are informed that what you're seeing is a deep fake. That is one of the transparency obligations which we see. And that, I think, will play a major role, in particular with now the new systems which are coming up, the general purpose AI systems.
And also for others, how is transparency playing a role in the work that like NIAC is doing, and also your work at Credo AI?
So, you know, for us, transparency is showing up in, I would say, three core areas. First is in the B2B businesses. So when you think about a producer or builder of AI services, and they're trying to sell to another enterprise. So in that case, you can imagine that under NDA, they can share very clearly what am I adhering these systems to, how have I assessed these systems, what potential risk might be, what might be the potential trade-offs. So we are enabling that layer, if you will, to enable an enterprise selling into another business to be able to transparently share what are the standards they are holding themselves accountable to. The second place that our transparency really comes in is in the commercial procurement of AI by government. So as you can imagine there as well, you know, what kind of assessments have been done, what kind of provenance has existed, who's reviewed it, and then what kind of liability that the company is taking versus what is the potential impact. So that's the second layer of, I would say, transparency that we are seeing. And then the third layer of transparency is aligned with the EU AI Act, where it is
less so about how the systems have been assessed, but more about the impact of these systems. And then we are seeing that more and more in our B2C businesses as well as B2B2C businesses where there are impacted communities, whether it is HR systems. And, that's why the New York City Law number 144, for those who don't know, it's been moved to July 5th. I think that's the date. But the idea there is companies who are within New York City jurisdiction are buying or building AI-based HR systems have to do disparate impact analysis for certain protected attributes like sex and ethnicity. So in that case, you can imagine the transparency is around these disclosure reporting, which the regulators are going to be paying attention to. So at Credo, those are the 3 layers of transparency currently we are focused on, but very quickly expanding as well.
So quickly, with NIAC, we certainly something we think about and balance. It's also been an interesting process because for most of the participants they have not necessarily served in government, and some have had a role outside of government. But understanding the FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act rules that require transparency in many of our discussions, deliberations, and so even understanding what that means on a different level, having that exposure as to how do you have tough conversations at the same time, making them publicly available. So I think we're thinking about it in a few different ways. At Equal AI, it's what a fundamental principle we think of good AI hygiene. And I think, there's different ways to look at transparency, obviously divergence in privacy and many other ways, not necessarily in laws, although there are some, but certainly in practices. But in terms of transparency, it's how you build trust. And so we're very explicit that you need to have accountability. There needs to be someone in your C-suite who is on point at the end of the day for these issues, particularly as they become increasingly pivotal. And there needs to be transparency within your company, in your organization, to build trust internally that then consumers can feel and build off as well. Because if you don't have that internal transparency, I don't know how you build the trust that your customers then would pick up on.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I have a follow-up from Miriam and Pam. You have both talked about that we currently have laws that are applicable in this space. And Navreen, I'm so happy that you brought up the NYC law, which keeps getting pushed down the line to later and later implementation date, where you'd have to do this risk or impact assessment of any procured or developed human resources tool. I have a knee-jerk reaction of, do we actually need that law, or do we just fall back on like equal employment opportunity, non-discrimination law?
Well, I think it would be a useful exercise for those people who are interested in AI governance to try to think about what maps and what doesn't. And I think that's something that can be done concretely, like now. And I think it would be a service to the community who are grappling with these issues to say, this one probably does and this one probably doesn't. That's actually something that might make a good kind of collaborative project. So I can imagine having a workshop where, we just sort of go down the list of various types of laws. And so I think, we already have non-discrimination principles in the law, and I don't see why they wouldn't apply in AI systems too. But of course, part of what we have as a problem, again, technologists and lawyers and policymakers working together, because the people who are developing the technologies often, they may know that there's this thing out there called the law, but they try as hard as they can to just ignore it as long as they can. And so part of what I think, some of the international organizations, so I've been a contributing editor for communications of the ACM. The ACM is the Association for Computing Machinery. It's an international organization with 100,000 members worldwide, and they have an AI ethics group. And it would seem to me that that kind of marshaling organizations like IEEE and ACM to kind of help work with other organizations to try to do some of this mapping stuff so that it raises awareness of sort of what the possible legal concerns might be. So that would be something I think very concrete that could be done.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And at minimum, showing how if you're going to develop a new law, make sure that it strengthens existing law and is not in conflict with or usurps it. My last question is for Killian, because the EU AI Act is poised to become law quite soon. Can you tell us when? and then also once it becomes law, what does implementation look like?
If I knew when it came into force, I would be a happy man. But I hope that I will still be a happy man at the end of this year. So let's put it like this. So we expect that now the European Parliament will adopt its approach very soon, and then we will over summer and in autumn we will have the final negotiations. And one thing is clear: there is a lot of time pressure because we will have elections next year. So either we finish late end of this year, beginning of next year, or it will be much more delayed. And I think we all have a common interest in the EU to make this piece of legislation now becoming real. At the same time, we foresee a 2-year transitional period. So we will, once the law is adopted, it will come into force. So member states will be obliged to set up these governance systems, to find the bodies, and so on. And we, at the same time, we will set up an expert group then to follow up. We develop the standards, and we have already started to work on the standards. So we want then that everything is in place 2 years after the entry into force. So that would then probably, let's be 25. Then the AI Act will really start to become reality for companies.
Thank you. And we have about 20 minutes for audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll come and give you the mic.
And if you don't mind, I'd actually love
actually,
to, while you're passing you the microphone, to answer that last question that you asked about the laws. I think it's such an important question. I wish it was asked more often, of what laws do we already have on the books before we're creating new ones. That said, while we do have civil rights and other laws, contract law and other laws, product liability, as you say, on the books, there is a need to clarify what are universal processes we should have in place when we're talking about AI, both so that downstream users, AI is crossing borders, crossing organizations like no other technology we've seen before. To the extent we can have consistency on what should you be documenting and what does it mean, so that someone downstream understands what they have gotten, whether using model cards or others, to clarify what is expected and what the definitions are, so it can be used downstream. So at a minimum, we have clarity on the expectations, so consumers can build that trust, so employees can know what's expected of them. But also, even better yet, I think a great government function is how can we make it a competitive advantage? Because currently, if you are adhering to these principles, you're almost creating a liability record to be used against you. Let's find a different way. Let's flip that framework so that if you are complying, if you're trying to make sure you're looking for bias and other harms in your AI, you are recognized as a good actor. There is some way to commend that effort as opposed to our current statute.
Thank you. My name is Sergio Strozzi. I'm the Italian Consul General in San Francisco. Thank you very much, Gare, for organizing this amazing event. Thank you so much to the speakers. For those who are curious, first thing, Italy's ban to ChatGPT doesn't come from the Italian government, but from the Italian Independent Privacy Authority, just to make it clear. And I have a question for Professor Salmons. I was very curious about your approach on yes regulation or not regulation, more liberal approach, because my thought was about, if we consider AI technologies a very critical sector, which might have very positive impact on the economy and society, but at the same time can hinder or can bring risks. What's the difference, and why shouldn't we regulate the states from other sectors where we think there are risks, like healthcare, pharmaceutical products, food? Every state regulate those sectors. Why shouldn't we regulate, as we are doing in the European Union, such a very critical sector like AI? Thank you.
Well, I don't consider AI to be a sector. I consider lots of the deployment areas the sectors, and AI deployed in this kind of sector. So if AI is used in airplanes, for example, I definitely want that to be safe, and I'm willing to have the federal administration do some regulation on that. And when it comes to AI in medical devices, that actually seems like another place where we'd want to have things, regulatory checks. But since I don't consider AI a sector of its own, I consider that the sectoral approach, which is fairly common in the United States, rather than the kind of across the board. That's what I'm expecting, is that we'll have the sectoral regulation, and the FDA might actually take on a greater responsibility for certain kinds of AI systems that haven't been in their charter for the past. But I am not arguing against regulation altogether, but I think that again, the ambition of regulating across AI as though AI was a sector, it's an interesting experiment, but I don't think, at least in the United States, it's likely to take hold.
Great. Thank you, Brandy, and everyone, for a great discussion. My name is Bogdana Rakova, and I'm curious, from the perspective of big technology companies such as Google and as well as the EU Commission, you're doing tremendous amount of work on trust and safety, protecting users, building contestability mechanisms that users can engage with, even though there might be a long and even impossible road to redressing algorithmic harm and injustice. And impacted users are often faced with answers from tech companies, such as their requests being in violation with terms of service and other agreements. And with that, what do you think is the role of civil society actors in the ecosystem, and what kinds of socio-technical innovation could better enable cooperation? Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your question. So, as I mentioned earlier, civil society are necessary to participate in informing not just the technology and its use cases, but also how to govern it and how to inform global standards and governments. So from our approach at Google, we've engaged, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of civil rights groups and human rights groups to try and understand how, not only to help us identify potential harms of some of the technology, but also how technology can help them achieve their goals. One of the examples that we've done, our team at Jigsaw has worked on technologies to ensure that journalists in unsafe areas can retain privacy and confidentiality over their identities, so they can remain telling needed stories in areas that may not be as supportive of their efforts. We also work with refugee groups in many different countries to ensure that they can use technologies even in low bandwidth areas to support their needs. So working with groups not just to identify the risks and harms, which yes is core to my work, but other teams trying to ensure that we're building technologies that actively help these groups to achieve their goals. So it is an ongoing effort, and definitely not a one and done, that we keep those conversations open and actively engage with those groups often to do both of those areas.
I was as well asked, just to come back to Professor Samuelson from the question before, we don't treat AI neither as a sector. So we fully agree that's not a sector. What we do is a horizontal legislation, because we think the risks are the same in whatever the sector is in which AI is placed, because there are these inherent risks. But we are, of course, this is as well for us a rather novel approach, that we regulate certain uses of a technology. On civil society organizations, I think it's very important that they are engaged. We did a public consultation, which was quite comprehensive to start with. We had a 2-year high-level expert group. We will have another expert group. We invite civil society organizations as well to participate in the development of the standards, because we think we use the model of productization, but we go certainly a bit beyond, because we do not only look at safety, but we look at fundamental rights. And fundamental rights is obviously linked to societal choices. So you need to hear the voice of society in order to get it right. So I think it's very important that we do events like today, but as well that civil society is engaged in this process.
All right. Thank you so much, Brandy, and the panelists. This has been a really fantastic event. I'm David Harris. I'm a faculty member at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, and formerly of the Meta Responsible AI team. I feel like we are in a strange moment right now, where we have the call for the 6-month pause. We have Elon Musk, but then also we have Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg calling for more regulation, calling for more government involvement in this space, in AI. And I'm wondering when that moment is going to end. Or maybe it's already ended, behind the scenes. It strikes me that we can't go on for that long without conflicts and with the companies fighting back or refusing or pushing to find loopholes or find points of weakness to add into regulation on AI. So I'm curious if the panelists would share maybe your forecasts. Where will the flashpoints be? Where will the conflicts be? When will the companies push back, or where are they already pushing back that people can't see yet?
I think it's a really good observation. So thank you for that. I think the answer has got to be we don't have any idea. It is the case that in the United States, a big catastrophe happens and then regulation happens. That's just it is an American mode of regulation, and so we don't have that right now. I don't see where it's going to come about. But do I expect one? Yeah, but I just don't know where it's coming from.
I don't have much more to add on that because my crystal ball is unfortunately down today. But I do think you're absolutely right. We do have this moment. I don't think the moment has closed. I think we have this moment of receptivity to action, to guardrails. Fortunately, I would say DC, I can't speak on behalf of other governments. My conversations are not as recent, but I do see regulators, lawmakers waking up there to understanding the important role and the importance of this moment. So I do think it's fair to say across the globe, there has been a reckoning that there's not time to wait, that there's a real need to set in place guardrails and consistency on what the expectations are. And I think that gets back to the prior point. I just wanted to thank you for asking about civil society. It's such a pivotal piece and in some ways most important and most complicated because it's the underserved populations that will be most impacted, displaced, that could stand to benefit the most. They could have the most economic benefit if this is done properly. But how do we make sure that we're hearing from general civil society, but also those who are not organized? I mean, that's the real problem here, is that so many of the people we need to hear from don't have necessarily representative who we know how to call in. So I think it's something we need to give great thought and intentionality to at this moment to make sure that we are engaging those who are underserved, underrepresented currently, to make sure that they are part of this conversation and to do so in a way that has dignity in their participation and that we act on, don't just listen, but that there's follow-up. So I wish I had a better answer. All I can tell you is it's something we're thinking about a lot from Equal AI, certainly with NIAC as well, and welcome feedback as we try to navigate.
And I just can I add one point to so Meta says that they want regulation. I've sat on the privacy committee in California for 4 years since the day I was elected. There hasn't been one piece of regulation that affects Meta that they haven't shown up to oppose and not been willing to come to the table and negotiate. So they say that, it's a great PR point. I've yet to see them invite and collaborate on regulation. So I think that we need to be real about where some of these actors are and what they actually want and what they do in the halls of power and when we try to do things. Because as I said, there are a few Silicon Valley companies that are not opposing our efforts in California, but most showed up yesterday and stood in line to oppose it, right? So they're saying they want it, and we have good actors that are working with Miriam and her entity, and they are at the table with us, helping us, but we need to equal the playing field. And as for our current laws, I just want to touch on this. It's really hard to bring a civil rights claim, you guys. Once discrimination has happened to these communities who do not have representation, for them to bring a civil rights case in California and win is really, really hard. And so for us to say on the front end, you have to prevent discrimination is critical to what our society needs.
If I may just add, because it's interesting you mentioned that point. I think this is in AI, it's so complex and we can't just plant the blame on one stakeholder. It can't be that policymakers aren't moving fast enough or the technologists aren't thinking about it. And this is truly an opportunity for that multi-stakeholder work, but also underscoring when laws do get passed, one, before they get passed, having, coming to the table. But secondly, when they do get passed, I think at least showing support for trying to adhere to it. New York City law is a great example. We have seen so much lobbying against that law it's been surprising because the New York City law is not trying to solve for all the things in the hiring space. It is very focused, it's specific. So the question then begs is, if there has been public-private partnership from the onset, and there's been at least a good effort to bring in a policy and legislation, what is our responsibility as private sector to show up and at least start showing compliance to it?
Thank you for excellent panel. So I've been part of some of those similar panels lately, and my question, sorry, I have to introduce myself. I'm Željka Lemaster. I'm part of Ericsson's AI Accelerator. I worked my whole life with AI, so I've been like really entrenched in that. But my question when I see those panels, committees, and laws is why is specific to AI? I see AI as a one methodology. Like for example, if you give me same set of data, like we have some examples like where you could be asked, like, give me the picture of the nurse and shows up as a female nurse and people are like, oh, that's not right. Why there's a male nurse too? But like if I just do plain search and rule engine, there's no AI in it, I'll get the same result if my data set is skewed that way. So therefore, it's not really just about methodology, it's the whole data source and everything. So I'm questioning, why don't we focus on laws and outcomes and not, guarding specific methodology? Because like maybe in 5 years, you'll have to make new laws specific to, quantum computing and stuff, but it's gonna be same issue. So that's kind of my question. Like, why don't we focus more like what's the emerging technology and what are the laws, like non-discrimination and stuff, rather than methodology?
I just think that's a great point, and hand it over. But I think that several laws and regulations have tried to pick up on that nuance and important point. I know the NIST framework is more broad than a specific type of AI or functionality. So it's a great point. I think in the New York law, they do try to be more broad as well. I think people are trying to think through how you do it in such a way so that it's clear to whom and to which functions it is and is not applicable, at the same time being more broad to allow for emerging technologies. But I do see that as something that regulators, policymakers are trying to take into account as they do their function.
Thanks a lot. This is indeed a very good question, because we obviously know that AI is not even one technology, it's a family of technologies. They're different techniques. They're sometimes mixed. They will develop further. We look here at a moving target. At the same time, what is for us was a trigger to look into the need to regulate is that AI is to a certain extent a game changer, because it's a different way of developing software where you do not really, where even the developer does not really fully understand why a certain objective is achieved. He just can check, or he or she can check to which rate of accuracy a certain result is achieved, but it's not necessarily able to prove how it has been achieved. And this can bring for the individual affected by this serious consequences. So if you then are not admitted to a university because the AI has not pre-selected you, nobody will really be able to give you a good reason. And if you try to sue, you try to complain, you may run up into a wall, because even the body taking that decision may just say, but we relied on the AI, we don't know. We gave all the data, we checked the system. I don't know why you were not selected. Others were selected. You're not. You're unhappy. We're unhappy for you. And this is the gap we try to fill. That's why we, for instance, in the AI Act, we did not foresee new redress mechanism, or we did not foresee new information requirements or anything alike, because what we think is we basically have to fill that gap, so that if this decision is taken by the AI, the individual should be on the same footing like if this decision has been taken by an analog system or by a human, so that there is the same level of information and the same level of control. And that's what we think is the specific risk. When you ask me now what will we do with quantum, I don't know. I hope that we don't need to solve every problem at the same time. We will need to see, but this is, I think we need as well to show as legislators, and this is very important, we cannot give up because the technology is moving so fast. I mean, we still need to keep this control as a civil society, that we decide how we want to live and what should be allowed and on which basis we want to take decisions and how we justify these decisions. That the technology is moving very fast is a challenge, yes. And we will sometimes run after that technology, I'm afraid. But we should not give in, because then we would allow that the game is turned the other way around.
Thank you. Because of time, let's take one of the online questions, and then we'll have one final audience question. So Zusa James asked, how should regulators in the EU and the US think about the seismic shift in the labor market and likely displacement of a large segment of the workforce due to AI and automation in the coming years? I love you all looking at each other.
I can start to give the others more time to think about a good answer, because this is indeed a critical question. When you've all seen the study from Goldman Sachs, when you now can discuss whether the percentage is right or wrong, but it will have a very significant effect on work, in particular on what we called before in ancient times white-collar work or employees, because a lot of these tasks will be automated. On the other hand, we have seen in the other industrial revolutions that other jobs will then be created. It's difficult to make this balance, but I think what we need to do in any case, we need to closely follow that. I think that's one of the things we do together, for instance, with the US in our cooperation, that we look at the effect on labor market. And we need to make a very serious effort on reskilling and upskilling in order to prepare people for this transformation, because this will be a transformation which will, that is for sure. I mean, one thing is how many jobs will be created in other areas, and perhaps we can have the benefit of working less and producing more. That may be nice. If I imagine that my email box would be automatically generated by an AI, I start to fall in love with the technology. But it's on the same time, of course, we need to see that the new opportunities which will arise will as well be fit for purpose for those who would then look for jobs.
Such a great question. You guys have done such a great job assembling an audience with such thoughtful questions, so thank you for that. I think that the labor piece is one that governments can play a particularly important role in, because that will get back to the first question. Is this an opportunity? Is this a barrier? Who is participating in the AI economy, and what does the AI economy even look like 5-10 years from now? So I think that's a place where we need more thought given into what do we want to be preparing people for, both current workforce as well as our children. Not that we only need to be preparing children for the workforce, but how do we make sure that they are digitally literate, that they are AI literate, that they know what they are using and how it can hurt them or how it can be more inclusive and enable them in more exciting and important ways. So from my Equal AI hat, it's something we give a lot of thought to, how we can make sure that we are incentivizing companies to work with government. How can government use the levers at its disposal to ensure that more people understand and can benefit from AI, as opposed to those who will lose their jobs, because many more jobs will be created. My job wouldn't have existed at Equal AI nor with NIAC 5-7 years ago. More jobs are and will be created. All of our jobs depend on are focused on responsible AI. So this is a new emerging field, as well as all the other outgrowths. Let's understand, and I think this is a really important place for civil society and for government to weigh in on how we make sure we're prepared, and that more of those who have been underrepresented historically are better represented and can better participate and benefit from AI and other emerging technology.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Though we have 1 minute left, and I did promise this gentleman he could ask his question.
Thank you very much. Benjamin Larsen, World Economic Forum. So in this increasing velocity of change, I think it's also clear, especially from this panel, that we have sort of distinct regulatory approaches, perhaps regulatory regimes even currently emerging. The US with kind of a holistic approach on one side, and then the US, for example, with more of a fragmented approach on the other side. We talked about local law 144. So based on a more fragmented state level, to which extent do you think going forward, is that an opportunity? Is it a barrier? Or to which extent do we need to think about also enhancing harmonization of regulatory approaches at local level, thinking perhaps about the medium to long-term perspective? Yeah, thank you.
I'm obviously not a regulator, but how we think about it, as I mentioned in a previous answer, is as a global company, and to Killian's earlier points as well, that fragmentation is a barrier both to the innovation and the governance side of things, especially for small and medium businesses, that some global corporations will be able to address it, but others will not. And that will lead to, as Miriam has also hinted at, a fragmentation at an economic opportunity level as well. And so, at least for us, as I mentioned, participation in global standards, one of many voices participating in that, bringing in multidisciplinary experts and stakeholders, whether it is governmental backgrounds, academic, industry, or otherwise, those global standards, and then hopefully that's both a channel and an input to regional regulations as well. There's many areas that there are commonalities around things like fairness, anti-discrimination, and transparency and accountability. There's already a lot of commonalities that could be brought together, but right now there is still a lot of differences in many of the other areas. I think it'll both slow down innovation and make the governance side harder, because then companies could claim that, well, there's so many that I'll just go with my local one and then hope to proliferate it, instead of what's the best at a global level for as many people as possible, while minimizing the harms to also as many people. So it's not just the maximizing benefits, you always have to make sure you're minimizing harms at the same, and I think that's much harder when it's fragmented at a global scale.
Last comment, really quick.
Oh, absolutely. I'll just keep it simple. I think harmonization at 3 levels is critical. First is obviously at the country level, and I think there's great work happening between US and Europe through TTC, and I know many of the folks here are involved. The second level is at the
TTC. No acronyms without the
Trade and Technology Council. Sorry, I'm still getting used to that. The second level of harmonization needed is at the industry sector. So we are seeing, for example, and going back to Jen's point, fairness in financial services, great. But what does that fairness within financial sector in Singapore versus in US versus in India mean? Harmonization there is absolutely critical, because as you can imagine, in this global world, that's very, very important. And then the third level of harmonization needed is at the use case level. So going back to the question asked previously, can you apply a peanut butter approach to AI regulation? Absolutely not. It needs to be very contextual, and it needs to be use case focused. So harmonization across use cases is going to be really important as well.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists.
And thank the moderator, of course, Brandy. Outstanding moderator. Thank you for coming. I mean, we will have further of these events. It was most illuminating. We'll have further visitors coming from Brussels. We'll try to bring them together, and with our convening power, please hang around. There's, I think, some food that we are going to serve, and continue to network, and follow us on at EUINSF, please. Thank you.